Tracee Stanley joins In the Calm. Tracee is the author of the best-selling book, Radiant Rest, Yoga Nidra for Deep Relaxation and Awakened Clarity, and her newly released The Luminous Self, Sacred Yogic Practices and Rituals to Remember Who You Are. Tracee is the founder of Empowered Life Circle, which is a sacred community and portal of practices, rituals, and tantric teachings inspired by more than 20 years of study in Sri Vidya Tantra and the teachings of the Himalayan Masters. As a post-lineage teacher, Tracee is devoted to sharing the wisdom of Yoga Nidra, rest, meditation, self-inquiry, nature as a teacher, and ancestral reverence. She is truly gifted in illuminating the magic and power found in liminal space and weaving devotion and practice into daily life. In this episode, Tracee takes us on a deep dive of her latest book, as well as an exploration of the surrender, the void, and the growth that comes with birthing any new chapter in life. You guys, Tracee is one of my favorite authors and teachers, and as you listen, I think you'll get a glimpse into why that is. I feel such sacred reverence in her words, in her messages, in her writing, and in her speaking. It really feels as though a portal to knowing yourself more deeply opens when I move into these practices and into this space with her. I am so excited and honored for her to share this wisdom with you in this beautiful conversation. Let's dive in. Welcome to In the Calm. I'm your host, Georgiana Alexander. Tracee Stanley, welcome to In the Calm. Such an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Georgia. I really appreciate it.
And your new book, The Luminous Self, Sacred Yogic Practices and Rituals to Remember Who You Are. Oh my goodness, it is out now. I am so excited for everyone to run to grab this book. We're going to dive deep into this, but wow, what a work you have. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for reading it.
I loved it. And honestly, I really wanted to go in and take a lot of time in each of the practices. I was on a bit of a time crunch because I got the early, digital to read through. And I just can't wait to go back in and luxuriate in all of the different practices. And it was, and we'll dive into this, but it was rich and personal and provocative. And there are just questions that I've asked myself before, but the way that you pose them, the way that you set the tone, it was deeply impactful. It broke me wide open in certain places. So I want to kind of touch in on that. Before we go deep diving into this amazing new book, I just want to share with all the listeners, I found you first through your book, Radiant Rest, and your Yoga Nidra teachings. And it really changed the way that I felt towards Yoga Nidra. It changed the way I felt about a lot of the traditional yogic teachings. It's accessible, it's beautiful, and you have this way of creating this container with your energy and with your voice. And this may not translate in English language, but I'm going to attempt to say the things that want to come through to say. And that is, it's almost in the frequency of your voice, I can hear the universe. You're opening these portals for people to connect in to their oneness with the universe. I mean, that's a powerful gift.
Thank you for that reflection. I really appreciate it. And I think that anytime that I write anything and share anything, it's really so that people know that they also have that power. They have that power to open these portals for themselves and to really move into transformation in ways that are very accessible. So I love hearing that you wanted to dive deeper into the practices, because I love to offer practices and not just talk about things in an esoteric way, but to give people tools and rituals and practices that they can kind of weave into their life. So thank you.
Oh, you are welcome. It was such a yearning. I was almost a little frustrated that I didn't have the time to sit and go into. So I'm really excited to be able to take that time to go into the practices. And something that I even found with your style of teaching, and what really attracted me to your work initially, was that you make things so accessible. These deeper practices, although they may bring up painful experiences, or they may crack you wide open, I felt always very held, and I felt this container of safe space. I felt that I could go deep, but almost like having a friend hold that space. Could you share with us a little bit about, for anyone that maybe isn't familiar with your work in Yoga Nidra and your yogic teachings, could you maybe share your translation of that work and what that represents for us?
That's a great question. And so I think I would first start with, they're not my yogic teachings, but they are teachings that I received from many different teachers, mostly in the Himalayan tradition and the Sri Vidya Tantra traditions. And they're practices that I practiced for a really long time. And I saw that they were helpful for me. And I began to kind of embody the practices. You talked about this idea of frequency. And so what I would say is that maybe what you're feeling or sensing is that I've lived with these practices for so long. I've taught and shared these practices with people for a long time, and I've held containers. I've also been in containers that didn't feel safe, that didn't feel welcoming, that didn't feel accessible, and sometimes even felt very leaky with their energy, to the point where they felt a little bit dangerous. And so anytime that I create any kind of space, whether it's in my live trainings or in my, sacred portal online, or on retreat, or in my writing, I try to hold that container. And so I think that might be what is coming through. I hope that's what's coming through.
Absolutely.
In the writing.
Yeah,
I hope that's
definitely what's coming through.
And I want people to be supported in their practices, because these practices, when we devote ourselves to them, they are very transforming. And when I say transforming, because we use that word a lot, oh, this is transformational, this is transforming, it's revealing, right? It's revealing to us things that we may not see in our everyday awareness, things that we may have forgotten about, including the forgetting of who we are, which is why I love the practice of Yoga Nidra. Because Yoga Nidra is this practice that really is a Laya yoga practice. So the word Laya refers to this idea of dissolution. And so we are kind of withdrawing all of our senses, like moving into that fifth limb of yoga, which is pratyahara. And as we withdraw our senses, we can reassimilate into our true nature. That's a definition from Swami Vedabharati. And that is like, oh, what's being revealed to me is everything that I am. And what is falling away is everything that I'm not. And that can be painful sometimes, right? Because
absolutely,
we're attached to who we think we are. So I always want people to feel supported, and to make sure that they have the support that they might need outside of a retreat or a workshop, which would include therapy or a mentor or some other form of support.
I think that, yes, what I have felt is your embodiment. I love that you go there, because in your new book, you really do get deep and personal. And I loved getting to see this side of you and your journey. And it really does translate the embodiment of your practices into your words, but also your translation of all of the masters you worked with, that embodiment that then you have this spark in you of, oh, I know how to make this accessible because I needed it in this way for myself. And that is what translates and speaks and really breaks down things. Like even in your new book, The Luminous Self, you're breaking down the kleshas in a way that I'm like, oh, I've practiced yoga and studied yoga for a very long time as well. Not as in depth as you, not with the masters you have trained with, but these are things that maybe I still had a sense of a little bit of dissociation. I could translate it in my personal life. I could feel it on a spiritual level, but in your words, in your embodiment, as you said earlier, with holding the space to break open the universe within others, because you're holding that space for yourself, you really do give way of an easier translation, a more accessible entrance point to all of these practices that I know for so many people that are working their day-to-day lives and living in a culture that they feel bombarded by, and they're looking for solutions. It really does have this homecoming feel with the way that you present. And so it's really, really beautiful. And I just wanted to have you touch in on that so everyone can have that entrance point with you. But I love how you share about connecting with intuition and consciousness as a way to access ourselves and experience the world more deeply. I would love for you to speak about this a bit more, because a lot of times I feel like a lot of the trendy language of intuition and consciousness and accessing ourselves, we hear things like, we want to be ascended. We want to have all the gifts, and we want to, escape the 3D. It's about disconnection. And you're giving this permission and this practice, this embodiment, to say it is about the experiences. And you've had the longevity of these practices to have that journey. Will you talk a little bit about this? I think it will relax everybody into saying, oh, I don't have to have it all right this second.
Yeah, I really feel like our practices are about, and many yogic teachers have said this before, so this is not coming from me. They're about being able to live in the world, but remain above the world. And that doesn't mean that you're detached from the world. It means that you understand that there's more to our existence than what's in the gross plane, right? But at the same time, this is where we are. This is the life that we have, right? And so we have this for a reason. We have these experiences so that we can learn. And I think it comes through, and I hope it comes through in the Luminous Self, that I received a lot of teachings around the kleshas, around these different philosophies from the yogic traditions. And we also have to acknowledge that when Patanjali wrote and gave us this beautiful gift of the Yoga Sutras, that he was writing that in a time that was 5,000 years ago. And so if we think about how our lives have shifted and how society has shifted so drastically in some ways, just in the last 30 to 40 years,
yes,
imagine 5,000 years. So we have to do more than just read about these sutras. We have to live them and we have to contemplate them. And I think that for me, there's one story in the book where I'm talking about my separation from a longtime partner, and who was also my business partner. And, I was having all these feelings of, anger and fear and, oh, my business is falling apart. And it was like, oh, wait a second. These are the kleshas right now showing themselves to me. What am I going to do about it in real time? What am I going to do about this in my real life? And the Yoga Sutras gives us tools to be able to try to transcend and move beyond, at least to soften the edges of the kleshas, right? And so I really feel like this idea of embodiment and the idea of translation that you talked about before is really the embodiment. I feel like leads to a transmission of being able to know how to talk about it in the time that we're in, and how to offer it in the group of people or with the group of people that you might be with at the time. So I really feel like these concepts are available to us all the more we apply them to our lives. And that requires inquiry, which is why there's so much self-inquiry in the book, is to get us to take those deep dives to see, how does this relate to my life, as opposed to keeping that separate, right? Which is also the same thing of keeping your spiritual practice in some way separate and disconnected from your actual day-to-day life. So the intuition, I think, is a revealing. And the more that we practice, the more we allow ourselves to begin to trust. I think that doubt is one of the biggest obstacles. And I talk about that in the book, that doubt is one of the biggest obstacles to our spiritual evolution, that we don't trust the path. We don't trust our own inner knowing. And we have to also be honest with this idea that the overculture does not want us to connect to our intuition, does not want us to connect to our inner knowing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And we also have to, I think we have to have a sangha of not only like-minded people, but of people who have differing opinions and differing backgrounds from what we have, so that we can connect in and really not have the same things echo to us all the time, but to be able to continue that inquiry within relationship. And so our intuition, I think, is very important to cultivate. And at the same time, you mentioned this idea that's happening now, where we notice that there's a lot of talk about intuition and manifestation and all these other things.
Which we love. It's just for everyone's feeling that deeper calling, and all they're surrounded by is sort of the surface static.
Right. I totally agree. And I think that when we have this idea of manifestation, which is very real, you can manifest, we have to be very clear about what is it that we're manifesting. Are we reinforcing the old patterns and samskaras and lessons that we're really tired of learning? Or are we deeply into our intuition and listening and asking for something that is moving us towards our higher good, even if it might entail a little bit of a revealing that might be painful to get us there? And I also think that we don't want necessarily to be attached to the boons of practice, because those can be obstacles. And it's spoken about in the Yoga Sutras that some of these things are obstacles to our spiritual advancement, to our enlightenment, to our transformation, to our freedom. So we want to be able to have all of these things and be able to be with our intuition and be with this idea of being able to bring into our lives or call into our lives what will bring us to a higher good, and also something that will help to really heal and hold the community. Because without community care, our spiritual practice is really incomplete. But we have to hold all of that with an open hand.
Oh, so beautifully said. Hold it all with an open hand. I love that. It's something that I feel like, as I hear the conversations of those around me who are new to their awakening, that's not been my case. You've had a very long journey. I've had a very long personal journey, but we all have constant growth and we all have constant changes, and we want to go deeper. And as you say, work with the deeper connection to the collective in ways that are going to bring about an entirely new landscape and reality. And it's there. I can see it and feel it. Those of us in this work, we see it and we feel it. We see that, as you say, all of the obstacles, all of the static and conversation of a lot of the things that we're currently experiencing in our modern day to day is taking us away. It is disconnected. It is meant to keep us separated from the truth of ourselves. And I love that you bring that back to carry that all with an open hand. Something else that you've talked about, and then I want to dive deeply into this new book, but I did want you to share on this point too, because I love your communication about the experience of the void. I think it's unique because, just as you were talking about, as we open, as we expand, as we inquiry with ourselves, there's sometimes deep and painful openings. And there's times of being in void, of this unknown, of this quiet where nothing's moving. And we're so used to constant movement. And I feel like for so many people in these experiences that are just really on that treadmill to tap into the next spiritual gift and the next spiritual gift, or come into some elevation, there's not a easeful nature around this idea of void. And I love that you have shared that the void is access points to our deeper self. It's where we can settle in, and it is normal. It is a part of this transition. Will you share your words on that? Because it's just so eloquent, and it's so contrasting to, I feel like, what people like naturally feel when they're going through the void. And it's just so beautiful. Those of us with long lasting experience know, lean into this moment. It's beautiful on the other side.
Thank you for that. When we think about the void, we can think about the idea of the liminal, right? And that root word from the liminal is lemon, which means a threshold. And it kind of refers back to this olden time where there was a literal piece of wood between one room and another room that was the threshold. The problem that I sense, and I sense this in myself and I sense it in society at large, is that we haven't had the rituals from our cultures preserved, or sometimes they've been stolen, in order for us to take moments or days or weeks or however long it needs to be able to pause in that threshold, in the in-between. So as a result, the in-between is a very scary place, because it's a place of uncertainty. It's a place of darkness. It's a place of, I don't know, can I go back? Should I go forward? I can't stay here. I feel stuck. What should I do? And so we don't have these rituals and we don't have these practices to be able to honor that liminal space, which is the void. And so I think that part of what I hope people will start to do is to reclaim these kind of rites of passages that happen when there is an ending, so that we can honor the beginning and create space for the beginning. And as we know in our society right now, everything is about convenience. Everything is about instant gratification. Everything is about, oh, I've got to get to the top. I don't have time to pause. I don't have time to rest. And I think that is really damaging to our culture. It's damaging to our spiritual practices. And we really get to see how uncomfortable we are with the liminal space, just in the spaces between the breath, when we're just asked to observe those transitions, right? And if we think about the fact that we're not in touch with nature, and when we're not in touch with nature, we don't get to see those beautiful cycles. Yes, the flower is wilting, and yes, the flower is eventually going to die, but it is going to create new life. That is not the end, right? And when we forget that, I think that it projects onto our own life, where when there's an ending, it seems like the world is ending. There's no space for just being in the discomfort. And that's the place that I really feel like we need to practice being, because the void is uncomfortable, because there's a lot of not knowing, right? It's not like it's always this blissful, dreamy place. It can be a place of discomfort, but that discomfort is a portal to your awakening.
I just love how you share this. That's something that has taken a lifetime of me. I still kick and scream, and then I'm like, oh wait, now I remember I'm in a void. And if I just relax and flow through this and allow myself to be present with it, it actually unfolds and feels very honoring, and it feels magical on the other side. And I'm always looking back and thinking, wow, I'm really glad I sat with that. But earlier in life, that was not the case. And I think, like many of us, in our culture, as you say, we are taught to like run away from those hard feelings. We're taught to escape, disassociate. And that's why I love your work so much, because it's accessible. And as you say, in this book, bringing you back to the rituals, bringing you back to the practices, and posing the questions that really do help you settle in almost enjoyably to the discomfort. There were definitely some times I was like, my jaw dropped while I was reading the book. And I'm like, Tracee, I've asked myself these questions, and then all of a sudden My jaw is dropped and like, I'm just flooded with all these emotions. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that was sitting there, So it's so beautiful the way that you share that wisdom with the void. I think it's important for everyone listening to give permission to take the time and space to go through their own processes and go through the practices. And that's why I said, okay, so now let's dive into your book. This is a great segue because I want to really dive into the specifics and chapters. But in the Luminous Self, you really are giving permission to come back into a settled self. And it's not so frantic and it's not so noisy. It really is an exploration. It's this adventure that you get to go on. And I said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. It's rich. It's provocative. It's personal. I really enjoyed getting to know you more personally in this book and getting to hear your journey and your stories. It just made it even more tangible, the experience somehow. And it felt like, oh, we're just hanging out, going through the hard stuff. And then you're asking these questions, and I'll be specific. It's the question, I feel like it was in the do list, which I want to get to as well, but about, are you living the life that your soul is calling you to? Basically, I'm summating. Your words were beautiful. And then the practice of, if you were only given a year to live or 6 months, and then you bring that down in the practice to a day. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I ask myself these questions at different points. I do review, but something in that practice just completely broke me open in the most beautiful way. And I literally had my jaw dropped. My emotions were flooding. It was incredible. So I just love how you came into an even new level of vulnerability, I would say, more than I've seen you in an audience before in public space. How did that feel for you in creation? Did that feel a little, did you have your own break open practice with writing this book?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because this was the book that I had created the book proposal for prior to writing Radiant Rest.
Wow.
And what I know now is that I needed to write Radiant Rest. I needed to have that experience of Radiant Rest because I needed more revealing as a person who is so introverted and doesn't share a lot of
can relate to that.
Super personal details. I share the practices, I share stories, but this was like, okay, these are stories that need to be shared in a way. They're extremely vulnerable. I share different stories about me being bullied.
I cried in that story and I was cheering you on, like, you've got this, as I was reading.
Thank you. My young one appreciates that. Yeah. And so it was a journey, because what I noticed, so there was about a 3-year period between when I wrote that original book proposal that included 2 chapters, because a lot of times when you give a book proposal, especially if you haven't written a published book before, you have to give them 2 sample chapters. So when I went back to dive into this and start the writing, I was like, oh, there is a little bit of hiding in this story. Like there's more that can be shared here. There's more that I understand. There's also more that I understand how to share, because now I've been through this deep writing process and deep sharing process around my first published book, Radiant Rest. So yes, there were definitely times where I was actually, as I was writing, I would pause and I would do the timeline practice, which is the timeline of going back in time to the origin of something to be able to deliberate its kind of effect and cause. And as I would sit there, I would be like, oh, here's another detail. Here's another piece. I'm in this space right now, and I am in the feeling tone of what was happening. And now I can write about that feeling tone, right? So there definitely was a process of sharing all of these things and being ready to share them, and also being in the space of the unknown of like, oh, I don't know what will happen with sharing these stories. But I feel like when I have shared them on retreat or in workshop, they have been really helpful for people to be able to kind of hone in on the philosophies of the practices, the philosophy of yoga in some ways, and how they adapt and work in our modern life when you're going through a divorce, or when you're going through a breakup, or when your business is dissolving, or when you're being bullied, or if your child is being bullied. So, yeah.
It was translated so deeply, and that's the experience that I had as the reader. I know everyone listening, you guys will have your own experience as you tap into this, but it really was so personal, and it gave this experience of where this person went through these practices yourself and saw the big shifting point. And now as I hear the story of your writing, I can even imagine, I feel like you must feel like a completely different person again on the other side of all of this experience, as we go through the unlayering process of ourselves.
Yeah. And it's always continuing. It's never complete. It's like, this is just one point on my journey. Let's see in 20 years where the next point is on the journey. But it's beautiful to be able to share these practices. When I was starting over, kind of, writing the book now in this time, as opposed to 3 years ago when I was thinking about what the book was. So that was like pre-pandemic.
Right.
I really thought about this idea of, if I were to leave a time capsule behind of practices that I really knew were transformative and awakening and life-changing, what would be the practices in that time capsule? And that is what the book is comprised of. It's like, these are the practices that I really feel have helped me change and shift, and have helped the thousands of other people who I've been in space with for decades to be able to also have wholesale life changes.
It's felt, the way that you created the book in two different parts, like first part, you're taking us through reclaiming your power is the title of the first part. And then in the second part, we dive into the portals and practices. And it was really like this journey. And I love that that's kind of the overarching theme that you've carried through this book is it's a journey. And so often we want to try to hurry up and get to the end, but so much of the juiciness and the wisdom and the experience is in the whole process of it. And that's why, going back into this, I was in a limited time of reading, and I can't wait to go back in and really luxuriate. And that being said, I actually did take my time with the reading and do some of the practices, but I just felt that yearning to want to go deeper and see this as a journey and see what it brings up. I could go chapter by chapter, but some of my favorite ones that really resonated for me the first times through was Ancestors Have Your Back. It was just so beautiful. Will you kind of share a little bit more about this with us? Because there's so much of our ancestry. This has been something that's come up more recently in my life, is reconnecting to ancestors who I've felt through my life, but had no association to. Like, it wasn't spoken in our family. So much of our history was lost. And I know so many people feel that way. It's suppressed. It's, as you've said, robbed from us. And this was such a beautiful reclaiming.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was a very important thing to be able to reclaim the connection to my ancestors. As a Black woman who has Caribbean ancestry and ancestry of peoples who were enslaved, there's so much that was lost and was stolen. And at the same time, I began to even be aware of ancestors when I first started practicing yoga. I had a very close relationship with my Nana. She was a preacher. She was very strict, not allowed to wear pants, not allowed to wear jewelry, that kind of thing. But I started to feel her presence really strongly when I began teaching. And it was something that I sort of was like, oh, she's here. Like, she's guiding me. She's giving me some sacred instructions. She's holding me. And then I just started to become more interested, especially when, all of the DNA, like ancestry.com, became available. And it was like, oh, there's a whole world of ancestors that I can feel around me. I can feel this holding, and I have no idea who they are. And so I started to create an ancestor altar where I started to bring in the ancestors that I did know, which were, my Nana, my grandmother, and my dad. And then I started to just ask, show me who else is here. And literally there was like a line of my grandfather's, my paternal father's lineage that was lost because his father passed away when he was really young and before I was born, obviously. And I had only ever seen one picture of him when I was very little. So there was this mystery, but I had a ring of his. And I was like, okay, I'm going to place this ring on my ancestor altar because I don't have a picture. And then all of a sudden, all of these ancestors and stories started coming forward. I literally, someone a few days later sent me a message and said, oh, I'm related to you on your grandfather's side. And then there was this whole secret little story that unraveled, and this secret side of the family that we had no idea existed. And then other relatives and pictures started coming from the 1800s and stories. And so it was like, okay, I've asked for this, and now I'm getting to see who's here. I'm getting to know some of the stories. And that continues. And so it was like, let me find out, what are the foods that my ancestors ate? What are the things they would have burned as their sacred smoke that were indigenous to their lands? And so it's just created a rich tapestry that is unseen but felt. And I do think that a portal, I really believe, was created during the pandemic. I believe there was a portal that was created, that there is this longing that I'm sensing in people that I work with to understand more about the ancestral realm and healing and the ancestral wisdom. And so I think that it's something that we should all really try to connect with, because it's part of us reclaiming our wholeness.
Yes. Yes. I think that for so many of us, there's so much trauma through all of our lineages that we kind of cover up and mask, and we don't necessarily tap into on the day-to-day level. But reclaiming that, as you said, bringing back, calling in your wholeness, it really comes back to, as you said earlier, moving away from the disconnect of the societal culture in the world and out there, all of the things that have been in our lives that we're taught, that we're told this is how things are. We're coming together in a deeper level on a collective to say we're reclaiming and honoring one another. We're honoring our ancestors. We're honoring their journeys. We're hearing their stories, even in the unseen and the unfelt. And it's powerful. It's so powerful. My family on my lineages are Native American in 2 different tribes. And it was something that was covered up a lot in our family, and it wasn't really talked about or discussed. And there's so much story in growing up as a seer, just as a generational seer. I'm seeing all the tribes, and I'm like, are they just in the what? Like, they were really respectful and at a distance. They weren't in my face, unlike many of the other things that were coming and talking. But as they came and honored when I gave permission, when I understood I needed to get permission, the healing that I felt and the connection to my earth life, and not just my star or universe self or that being, it's so different. It really does calm you from the trauma. It brings you back into oneness with everyone around you, I feel like. And even down to the foods, as you said, that's such a big thing, right? Like, we don't think about it because, especially now, there's such a health craze of like, oh, eat this, do that. But then with what it is that our bodies are calling us, it is a homecoming to ourselves. We're honoring our actual physical organic matter.
At 100%, 100%. Yeah. And I think it's really important what we're talking about now, because we're talking about this and speaking about the collective, but we also have to acknowledge that there is a part of the collective that is not interested in holding and respecting and honoring one another, that is not interested in learning and honoring the stories of all the ancestors of this land and the truth.
In fact, the opposite. In fact,
the
they're working very hard to.
And the truth of history, right? And so I think that what it means for us as seekers and practitioners is that we have to double down.
Mm-hmm.
We have to double down on our practices. We have to double down on learning the stories of our ancestors, learning the practices if we can. And even if we're adopted, through a DNA test, finding out the regions where our families were from, where our peoples were from, going to visit those regions, like I said before, eating the foods from those regions, and just asking to be shown. There's so much that has been lost, but really isn't lost.
Yes. This really touches into another chapter that was really touching to me, was reclaiming the elementals, or the relationship, awakening our elemental nature. And again, going back to the foods of our ancestors. But as we ask the land, we're activated in what is meant for us, what is our lineage and our heritage. And I just love that you have this whole practice of sitting, of knowing the elements around you, of knowing the nature and the animals. And that's something I do. I love it. It's so natural. You don't think about it. And then I don't think as many people think of that. I think, oh, well, there's the pigeon family that are taking a walk down the sidewalk, and they've been here for so many seasons. But there's wisdom and answers in the air and in the wind and in the grass and in the trees. And just as you're talking about reclaiming that connection to our ancestry, I find that when I sit in nature and ask, they bring me and deliver all of that wisdom through the air, through the grass, and I get visions, and I hear the voices, and I hear the songs, and I hear the messages and wisdom. So it's just this whole reclaiming that's so beautiful, the way that you illustrate that.
Thank you. I mean, indigenous peoples have known this for millennia. And again, because we're so disconnected from our original peoples, we are not paying attention. And so I was really inspired by the story of Dattatreya. Dattatreya was a prince, and he was enlightened. And there were kings that came from all over to find out how, about his wisdom. And then, of course, they wanted to know who his gurus were. Like, who are you studying with? Right? This happens in modern time, right? Who are you
I need to take notes.
With?
Don't gatekeep.
I need to go. Yeah, I need to go to your teacher. And he basically said, I have 24 gurus. And he started to name them: the deer, the pigeon, the snake, and on and on and on. And so it really inspired me when I first heard that story. Like, who are the gurus that are around me? And at the time I was living in Topanga Canyon in Los Angeles. So I was lucky because there was more nature than if I was living in the city. But even in an urban environment, there are the birds that come to the window, right? There are the squirrels. So we can see those elements. We can see.
There's the water and the air.
The water
in the air talks to us.
Exactly. So I wanted to inspire people to connect to nature and have a way and a practice to be able to do that, because this is another portal into the liminal space. When you are connected with nature, you get to see the cycles of birth, of death, and of recreation. And when we're knowing in those cycles, and when we've seen those cycles and we feel them then in ourselves and accept them within ourselves, I do feel like life becomes less scary. It can become less scary for us, especially in those times of the unknown. So now I'm living just outside of Santa Fe, and I'm really fortunate because there's a game trail that runs right behind my bedroom and kind of around my front door. And
that's amazing.
So I get to see the deer. And, that was like my kind of first entry into moving into this new space, is like, who's here now? Now I'm not living in California. Now I see the bobcat. Now I see the pack of coyotes. Now I see the wild turkeys. What's happening? Now I see the bird that's building her nest, and I can hear the little babies chirping.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually they're going to fly out of the nest and that nest is going to be empty. So there's so many correlations between the life of nature and the cycle of nature and our own lives that we have become disconnected to. And I really feel like nature is just waiting for us to remember her and remember ourselves as her.
Absolutely. I feel like every day that I take walks in nature, I should say I live in a city, but I'm surrounded by nature. I'm a few minutes away from a nature reserve, as well as I have a gazillion bunnies. All I'd see are bunny butts all day long. I just giggle, and hawks come to my back door. It's just really beautiful. But there'll be times that I'll be walking in nature and think, why haven't I seen any animals yet? And I give that permission. I give the permission to see, and suddenly I'm surrounded by hawks will fly so close to me. If I just touched my fingers out a little bit, they would be grabbing hold of my hand, or a deer walk up to me face to face, just a couple of feet away. And we just have a moment and have a conversation. And it does help bring you back to a wholeness, a place in the world that feels so comforting. And it really is so simple as coming back to breath and coming back to these practices and coming back to nature and getting to know yourself, and circling back to what you said earlier in the beginning of our conversation. It's living in the world, but above it. And it really does, from that perspective, dissociate us in the right ways from all of the things that are just static, total BS, not of importance, not truth, and not here to elevate anything or anyone other than a bottom line, or making a buck off of the suffering of anyone else.
Yeah. And it's, when you think about this idea of above, it's about perspective, right? It's like when we're in the world, we tend to have this kind of tunnel vision of when we're in the world, we tend to have this kind of tunnel vision of what's immediately around us. And it's really hard to see and feel what's happening in the collective, what's happening in the whole, what's happening to the earth. Mm-hmm. Because if there's not a fire on your block, most of the time people are just they're going about their business, right? It's not until there's a fire or there's a natural disaster that's affecting them that they start to think about, the earth as a whole. Right. And so this idea of remaining above is also this idea of perspective, to be able to see the oneness, to be able to see the wholeness and remember all of that, and then act accordingly. Act accordingly as if you know, and as if you are feeling and living in the wholeness at the same time while you're grounded on this earth, because we are in this body at this time.
Yes, we are. And that's why your embodiment practices are so empowering. The way that you walk us through these practices, it's like this dance. And when I say this text is rich, it's rich because, just as we've talked about in the practices of reconnecting with, we could go into so many others. We're not, for sake of time, but I could walk through each portal that you unlocked in each of these chapters, but to connect us to the richness of the life that we're meant to live, of the truth of the way life is meant to be felt and experienced, and the beauty of even the deepening or the painful parts. That's a part of it too. And we do see that in nature and in our cycles. And it's just so good, you guys. I am so honored that you have been here. I'm just so excited for this community to get to hear you and see your work. And if they know of you, to know you more deeply. And if they don't, to connect with your words and your wisdom. As I said, every time I hear your voice, the frequency, it's like you just have this passion for opening up the universe to everyone around you. And it is felt and it is seen. So I'm honored to be in presence with you.
Thank you so much, Georgie. It's been an honor to be here with you.
And before you head off, two things, if you could share. First of all, can you share your human design and astrology? Because I feel like inquiring minds, like, I just need to know.
My human design is manifesting generator.
Okay.
I am an Aries. I don't remember. I don't really focus too much on my astrology.
On the astrologies.
Because the part of what in my tradition that I kind of grew up in was that the practices are there to loosen the universe's hold on you and to loosen the power that the stars have of holding you in place for a certain thing. So I haven't paid a lot of attention to that, but I am an Aries. And I have, Mars is one of the planets, the main planet. It's like a big planet for me. Rahu, if anybody knows Vedic astrology.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love I like knowing all of the tools. I'm a 3/5 projector. And so I love exploring all of the tools, but just as you've said, not to be held by them, but to be supported and expanded.
Exactly.
And I love how you said loosened. It's not something like, oh my gosh, this is happening right now in astrology and that's all I can live for. No, we don't subscribe to that, but it is fascinating. I was just curious, just in your language of things, that just so everybody, if they are interested in human design, can tap into that context of like, oh, I resonate with that. I'm a manifesting generator too. So thank you for that share. And also, if you could please share with us, you have so many incredible ways to connect and work with you. You have this beautiful sacred membership. You have courses and trainings, as well as your books, which I'm going to link in the show notes. Everybody run to get the Luminous Self, Sacred Yogic Practices and Rituals to Remember Who You Are. It is out now. How else can we connect with you?
The best way to connect is through my website, which is Tracee with 2 E's, Stanley, STANLEY.com. And there, it's a journey. So I would say go into the portal and see what calls to you. The membership, there's kind of a free amount of time that you can come in and check it out if you want to dive into Yoga Nidra and Dharma talks and some of our special guests. It's wonderful. And I love teaching retreats in person. So Costa Rica and New York.
I've stalked a couple of your Instagram retreats and they look so divine. I feel like I can breathe more deeply just watching some of the scenes of where you are. So it looks so juicy to get to show up in real life with those retreats. And I can say I've met Crystal, who ironically, I don't know if she passed this on. She is someone who comes into your membership, I believe, and speaks and connected us in this time and schedule. I just said to the universe, I really would like to sit down and speak with an herbalist. I think that would be a great conversation. And then through connecting with you, I see on her signature and her email, herbalist. I'm like,
yes, there you go.
So divine.
And
so
she's
divine.
lovely. She
is so lovely.
She makes the most amazing products.
I have tried them. They are so delicious. I just love them. Thank you so much for being here. It has been such a treat. Everyone listening, I will link all the different ways to connect with Tracee in the show notes. And I cannot wait for you to get your hands on this book. I want to hear about your experiences. Reach out, connect with us, share what comes up for you, share how you're deepening in your own embodiment and where you are with this. So I can't wait. Much love to you all listening. And Tracee, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening as well. Take care.